everybody, and welcome to the next stirring edition of There's a Will. I'm Will, this is my show. And today, I have very special guests, and you can see, as usual, I have packed my yellow legal pad with pertinent jottings, many pages of them, most of them irrelevant to today's discussion. But, in fact, I hope that my guests will help me to stay on track. And what we're going to discuss today is something that an issue that seems to be very prevalent throughout not only Europe but the United States as well, and that is the subject of, well, in Europe, Euro-Skepticism, and generally the movement towards, or the conflict between those steadfast proponents of individual liberty and those who see a collective as the way forward for not only Europe, but the human race itself. So I have invited, not policy wonks, but very intelligent people. I have with me, as usual, the estimable Nicholas Richardson, an Oxford man, and we won't let him live that down, because we have also with us Guy Pinsent. Almost forgot his name there. So he makes me nervous, you see, that he's so sartorially prepared, as I am not. An Oxford, a Cambridge man. So we have an Oxford man and a Cambridge man and a St. Andrews man. I'd like to welcome for the first time on the show, because Guy and Nicholas, of course, have been on several times, Philip Evison, an estimable man also in his case. Now, we will find perhaps in this discussion that Philip and Guy may be at loggerheads. I don't know what that means, but I think it means conflict.
I think it does mean conflict, yes.
Yeah,
but conflict in a nice way.
It means conflict in a nice way. Well, what is a loggerhead anyway? It's weird, isn't that? A weird thing to say.
Probably something to do with chopping down trees.
Is it?
Yes.
A loggerhead is where the logs get clogged up?
Head to head down
It's
the
not
river.
like loggerhead turtles fighting it out with their ancient craniums?
Except they're leatherhead turtles.
And they live forever?
Not loggerhead turtles.
Loggerheads? I don't know. I have no idea. But I like saying catchy phrases.
You do.
And when I say them, it makes me feel good. And I get, cards and letters. I don't, actually.
We don't.
No
cards, no
I don't
letters.
get any cards or letters at all.
No
Valentine's
cards,
Day from your
no
mother.
letters, no stalkers.
No, but soon it's good. Before we get into the hard stuff, let's just, let's relax. Everybody stretch out a little bit. I like to get stretched out.
Not a keep
Limber
fit
up.
show.
Yeah, get limber up and mentally acute. Not cute.
Acute.
Acute.
Nicholas goes, I've got my makeup on. I know I'm cute.
Yeah, of course.
Now, I mean mentally acute,
Well, that's okay.
as opposed to vacuous,
Yes. Well, there's
which
too
means
much.
somebody who likes to vacuum a lot,
Yes.
apparently.
Yes.
Right.
Apparently.
My girlfriend told me. She's not
Yes,
very
well,
smart.
No, she's
She's smarter than I am, but
yes,
she's
clearly.
not very smart. So I don't even know why they picked me to do this show. But about Euro-Skepticism, but let's just say it's an ancient problem, isn't it? It goes back a long way. We might say that the Euro-Skepticism we have seen, particularly in the 20th century, with the outbreaks of two huge wars because people couldn't get along. Yeah. And that's where the EU comes in originally, isn't it? It was an idea, as Mr. Churchill said. I call him Mr. Do you think that Boris Johnson is the reincarnation of Churchill? Because Churchill died in 1965. He was born in 1966.
That's an interesting theory.
Do you
Well,
think
he's
the
his autobiographer, so clearly he's trying to be Winston Churchill. I think
he's
he's
trying to be.
has a long way to go, but that's another topic for another time, clearly.
Well, we might mention Mr. Johnson a little bit, and as we talk. But at any rate, the EU started as it was the European Economic Community, which started as an attempt to unite Europe through business, so that everybody's in each other's pockets, so to speak, and making some money, and they don't want to kill each other for a change. After centuries of doing that, right? A couple thousand years, more or less, right?
Well, that's an interesting point. You're asking about the history of Euro-Skepticism.
Well, yes, let's... yeah.
So I actually just had a chance to read a fantastic book. I don't get much reading time, but this was given to me by a good friend. Said, you must read this. And it's a wonderful book called The Dream of Rome, written by no other than one Boris Johnson, published in 2006.
I knew we'd get to him.
And this is Boris explaining how the Romans did it. They presided over the largest period of peace and prosperity when they built their empire. The empire took about 400 years to build, and then it lasted another 400 years, up until about 400 AD. And this is the big question: how did they manage that? And every nation that's built an empire ever since has tried and failed, or the empire's lasted much shorter periods of time.
Each time progressively shorter.
And it's a wonderful book because he weaves the history of Rome with today's modern world and Euro-Skepticism today, or in the early 2000s. And asking that question, was there Euro-Skepticism back in the days of Rome? And the answer was absolutely. And the book starts off in AD. It
was Roman skepticism in a sense.
Well, I think you might find yourself slightly incorrect. Fortunately, we've known each other for a long time, so
you're allowed to jump right in.
We often agree to disagree.
Yeah.
I think Boris Johnson obviously is a classicist and a very highly intelligent man when it comes to the subject of ancient Rome and ancient Greece. From my knowledge, in Rome, every citizen was proud to be a citizen of Rome. So wherever they were found in the far flungs of Europe, near the borders of barbarian Germany at the time, or near the borders of barbarian Pictland, there was always the rule of law, and there was always, indeed, the fact that every Roman citizen felt proud and under the knowledge that they were a Roman citizen.
Well, actually not. That's what I was just about to say before you kindly interrupted me. So the book starts in September AD 9, when the Roman governor of Germania, which they thought they had pacified, AD 9, September 9,
not 89, because some people go, that's 30 years ago.
No, exactly, no. So
we're talking 2000.
2009 years ago, 2010 years ago.
Yeah, there you are.
Almost to the day. And we're in Germania, and there's a governor, Varsus, who thinks that he's got Germania under control. Actually, he's being led into a trap, and he's been told that there's a bit of a rebellion in one part, which he can't wait to go and suppress, because there's nothing. The whole glory of Rome is about beating up the barbarians and keeping them under control,
keeping them outside,
and expanding the empire.
Yeah, right. Keep pushing them.
That was how you moved up the sort of social ladder towards the top of the tree in Rome, and he had a local German tribesman who'd sort of become a Roman, who'd befriended himself, but he was playing a long game, and led them into the woods, into a killing ground, and 3 legions were annihilated, and so then obviously it took about 3 weeks for the news to get back to Rome, and the emperor, of course, was distraught, and that was a turning point. That was when they thought, right, now we stop expanding the empire, and we draw a line, and we leave these German barbarians to themselves on the other side of the Rhine.
You're not making a point about today, are you?
Well,
the German barbarians. No.
But the point was that
at a certain point
there was always,
expanding.
as the empire was expanding,
Yeah.
some people embraced it, but there was skepticism.
No, sure. Yeah.
And it was this constant struggle.
Even as omnipotent as the Romans were for a long time.
Exactly. And Boris Johnson, he argues how today there are not the same binding influences for the wannabe empire of the EU as there were back in the days of Rome. So that the emperor was a god incarnate. Everyone had to pay homage to him. Everyone, if you were a poor swineherd in the woods with not much opportunities in life pre-Rome, there were huge opportunities. You had baths, you had clean clothes, latrines, you had pubs you could go to.
That's a good point, because
in
people
cities,
who support
you
the
had
EU now would say we're getting the same thing from the EU. We're getting the same benefits that the Romans were known for. Remember the famous Monty Python? That was very good.
And they had a unifying language. Latin and Greek with a sort of bilingual language.
I didn't know I was going to get that kind of background. That's really good. And Philip too. But if we look at, the Monty Python thing was, they said, what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, roads! And then the next thing.
Sure.
The next
Central heating.
Central heating, yeah.
Sure. A legal system.
Baths, yeah. Legal system, they shouted out. I don't know, what was that, Life of Brian or something?
Life of Brian, yes.
And we can look now, I think, and say, the people who are proponents of the EU say, look, there's a civilizing and a influence and a beating down animosity. Certainly that was the original idea. It's been the idea. But now it seems that things have turned because, as you rightly say, there's a tipping point how far things can go in terms of the centralized control before people start to go, some people start to go, hey, wait a second, I didn't sign up for this.
Sure.
Okay, and so the Euro-Skepticism we see in places like Central Europe and the UK, most famously the UK, because people don't know as much in their everyday, have as much store in their everyday knowledge as we do about Central Europe, because we live here a lot of the time.
Or about the European Union at times.
Or about the European Union, that's true too.
Suspect.
So we can look at these countries against this background of skepticism. We look at the UK, and we can look at Poland, you know, as well, and the Central European bloc that's forming, you know, even every month by month, and recreating that old, you know, what do they call the Baltics to the Black Sea bloc, you know, which was prominent here for several hundred years. Okay, up until the partitions, when it kind of eventually did completely disintegrate. If we look at what's going on in the UK, Philip, let me throw this over to you. Why should people in the UK want to submit to a European unelected, some would say authoritarian
Well, that's the common
group at the
myth,
top?
isn't it?
The Commission.
The common mythology of, let's say, the Eurosceptics and indeed the British press that have been banging their drums for many years, decades in fact, ever since the British government decided to access the common market at the time, is this myth that there is this enormous group of unelected bureaucrats. When in fact we look today at the European Union, it's a bloc of approximately 28 countries, soon to be 27, with a population of 500 million, soon to be 450 million people, accounting for 16% of world trade. It's one of the largest trading blocs in the world, and it has a bureaucratic, shall I say, unelected civil service of 38,000, 40,000, and that includes 32,000 in the European Commission, 7,000 in the European Parliament, 3,500 in the Council. That's basically smaller than Greater City Manchester Council.
It's 1/100th of
more
1%.
than a London borough.
It's 1/100th of 1%.
Birmingham City Council employs more bureaucrats than the European Union.
Exactly. Is that right?
That is fair to say, yes.
Is that fair to say?
So,
and then we get into the argument of these unelected commissioners. Well, we elect our politicians who are the representatives of our government, who are members of the Council of Ministers. They elect the commissioners from generally their political party and from their nation state. The argument one can counter for the Eurosceptics is, do we elect the head of the United Nations? Do we elect the head of the IMF? Do we elect the head of the World Food Bank program? Do we elect, all sorts of other institutions, as of the European Union?
They have no effect on British laws.
It's more of a legal problem, isn't it, at that point? And also a tax problem, because those are institutions. You're quite right in saying that. They're important institutions, but they don't have the same legal precedence.
The fundamental issue...
The Commission does.
The fundamental issue about Euroscepticism is that time and again you see across the world, people want to have their own right to self-determination.
Yeah.
They want to have connection, assuming democracy is the least bad form of government, as Churchill famously said. You want to have that ability to elect your politicians who make your laws and have the chance to throw them out if you don't like what they do.
The last time I checked, you can easily. You elect your members of parliament, you elect
Can you name me 4 commissioners?
At the moment, who have been recently elected?
They haven't been elected, they've been...
Well, they've been chosen.
Appointed.
They've been appointed by their nation state. But what that has to do with the fact...
Can you name 4 commissioners?
At the moment, in the new commission, I would have to say Wojciechowski, who's the agricultural commissioner from Poland. The French commissioner was put aside. So they've just been elected. I think Mr. correct me if I'm wrong, because this is of the news as of yesterday or 2 days ago.
I have to
a chap
Google
called
that. I have no
Bernier.
idea.
Exactly.
I'm
The
waiting
Danish-
with
The
bated breath.
Danish minister. But
Yeah.
these are. But can you actually?
and most people though couldn't even name one.
Yes,
And
but
this-
that's
but
not the
there's
point
a-
because
there's a
like,
huge
I don't know
distance.
what's the
most
point you're
people- most
making.
people
The
in
point I'm
England-
making is there's an enormous distance between the
yes.
members of the European Parliament and the commissioners in Brussels who are churning out this sausage factory of laws which affect everybody without any scrutiny, without any real input, and without the electorate having any idea who they are or what they stand for.
Well, who can name
And
the British
that is
commissioner
completely
to,
different
I don't
in-
know,
in
India?
British
I mean,
politics.
It's the same issue. It's not really that important to know who the commissioner is. If you're interested,
I think it's pretty important if they're
you can
if they're
Google this
proposing new
online
laws.
and can find out. They don't propose new laws. That's the fundamental problem. You have a situation whereby the European Union is an organization that cedes sovereignty, and this is the big issue. But they do it for certain reasons, because the nation states of Europe have decided to pool sovereignty to create a common market. And then there are issues that transpose national sovereignty. So, for example,
Transcend.
you mean? Regulation with regards to food standards, for example. You have multiple jurisdictions throughout, let's say, the European trading bloc. There needs to be a common standard. And so the nation states of Europe decide that they will agree to a common standard and thus lose a bit of sovereignty in terms of the oversight. So they give this to the Commission.
Well, but you
who
gain
then-
in other things like free
Absolutely.
passage through the borders, and you save a lot of money on
regulations with regards to,
transportation,
for
things like
example, something that hits every individual, I think, directly in their pocket when they go traveling within the European Union, tends to be, for example, roaming charges. Now, this was always set by national carriers, by national telephone networks. Since the 1980s, there's been a massive deregulation in national communication networks, and this has been a benefit to
It seems like
the
a good
individual.
benefit, yeah.
Absolutely.
But Guy, you
Well, I
would
was just going to say,
how would you respond to
I
him?
would just say, how on earth does America manage to trade with India and China manage to trade with Brazil? There's no European Union involved. They get on with it. Most of the world's trade goes on outside the European Union. Britain has 20% of its GDP is exports, of which most of that is outside the European Union.
Well, you'd be surprised to discover 45% of your exports go into...
And there are plenty of countries, everyone, and this whole mantra of the Eurofiles saying you need access to the single market, and that's why Britain must stay. And again, is a complete... false impression, because all countries from around the world can trade into the European Union with or without a trading deal. If there's no deal under WTO terms, the maximum average tariff is about 3 or 4%. Of course, because the customs union, which by the way is a misnomer, customs union is really a euphemism for protectionist racket. Okay, it protects certain industries,
farming, for example,
such as farming, such as French
You're
farming.
saying it's a euphemism for
It's
something.
impoverishing consumers across the European Union.
Yeah.
Food, on average, is 15 to 20% higher in price than it would be if there was no customs union barriers keeping out African farmers. So it's impoverishing consumers within the European Union, inside the wall, and it's impoverishing African farmers outside who can't sell in because of enormous specific tariffs imposed on several products to protect German coffee roasters, French farmers, olive producers, and so on in the Mediterranean.
I think we should talk about fishing. Go ahead, Philip.
You're slightly jumping topics here. I'd like to revert back to the point about, let's say, just the issue of trade, which is, I think, a very big issue, especially with a certain percentage of the electorate in the United Kingdom, which I'm not too sure fully understand the ramifications of what, let's say, a hard Brexit would do to the United Kingdom.
There's no such thing as a hard Brexit.
Well,
what is a hard Brexit?
Allow me just to respond to some of your points. 45%
Brexit without an agreement, a written agreement.
45% of
that's
British
hard Brexit
exports
in most
go
people's
into
vernacular.
the European
You're saying that it
Union.
doesn't mean anything.
28% of food products that are found in British shelves come from the European Union. Services, financial services, account for 2/3 of the UK economy. And now leaving, let's say, the single market or leaving the customs union will have a direct impact to these sectors in terms of creating bureaucratic barriers immediately in terms of VAT regimes, in terms of declarations of equivalence, etc., adding another 12 or 13 steps in terms of filling out documentation needed to import or export into the European Union, which will have a direct impact on manufacturing in
Again,
certain
sorry,
regions.
Philip, that's all scaremongering.
With regards to the service sector in particular, which the UK is very big about, which accounts for a much larger percentage of the UK GDP than, for example, in Canada, which everyone, especially with regards to the Brexiteers, want to create a CETA plus type free trade agreement with the European Union, which would be very similar to what the Canadians recently agreed. The problem is that no one's really quite understood among the Brexiteers that Canada actually exports mainly precious gems, minerals, and these type of issues. They don't
Things
have
that are not found in Europe,
exactly.
particularly.
You don't have
They're
a very
competing.
large service
That's the
sector,
point.
which is extremely important for example, the United Kingdom economy.
Particularly the financial
83%,
sector, you're saying.
Absolutely, but not only. All
the
services,
City of London, particularly.
That's a major percentage of the
well, it's an easy example to
United Kingdom
to
economy.
back up what
but
you're saying.
services accounts for 83% of employment in the United Kingdom.
Yeah,
so
sure.
not having an agreement to enter with the UK services, it will have a direct impact on the European Union as a whole, because you are basically dislodging a major financial hub which has been developed over the last 40 years to the constant jargon of Paris and Frankfurt and Amsterdam, and it has become a global financial center. You have 8,000 financial firms from the continent of Europe actually working and creating business in the City of London, and approximately 5,000 of the UK that obviously invest and sell insurance policies and all sorts of financial products to the European Union. Having a, let's say,
but they were doing that before Maastricht anyway. So.
Of course, but
London's been the global
which was
financial
early
centre
90s,
for 300 years.
Yeah, it has.
One or two.
But it also,
I'm not sure what the point is.
well, the point is you're dislodging the ability to easily trade and to communicate between these firms. So over the last 3 years, there's been approximately €1 trillion worth of equity that has managed to flow out of London into the European Union to the benefit of Dublin and Amsterdam and Frankfurt. A lot of financial institutions,
Britain has attracted more foreign direct investment than
specifically
the rest
into the United Kingdom
every other
economy,
country in the
but
EU.
not with regards to the financial services sector.
Jump in with a rebuttal,
come
then,
across.
Guy, if you feel the need.
There is going to be, I think, a massive issue with this belief that the problem lies with the extension period that currently everyone is negotiating, is the fact that all this does is create a transition period for the next 18 months. The issue that had been agreed is to resolve the issue of the Northern Ireland situation. I think your viewers and everyone will recognize that Ireland creates a specific problem due to the historical reasons of
for the first time ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because of the reasons of the Troubles, because of the unionist nationalist situation they're in, the fact that there are no borders currently at the moment, and the issues that the Good Friday Agreement was, in all honesty, a tripartite agreement between the European Union, the United Kingdom, and actually the United States. And I don't think everyone recognizes that not having an agreement with regards to Northern Ireland would create potentially this spark to reignite the flames. And this would have not only an impact to the peace and stability of Ireland, but will have huge dire consequences to the United Kingdom in terms of their decision to approach the United States for a free trade agreement. Whatever President Trump might espouse in the media and in the British press, that there will be a free trade agreement undertaken immediately, I don't think many people in the British press actually recognize that free trade is negotiated and accepted by the US Congress. And Ireland and Irish Americans are a hugely important lobby within the United States. Anyone who goes to visit America during St. Patrick's Day celebrations can see this in any city along the Midwest or the East Coast, from Boston to Chicago.
I mean, this is a different subject. There's a bit of a filibuster, but nice try.
A filibuster from a
well
Philip.
done. It's a good filibuster, but nonetheless. I mean, I think the important thing that Philip is raising here is just the difference among the various parts of the UK. And Scotland, for example, wants very much to stay in. England pretty much wants to stay out, but I think it's quite a large margin. Wales, where are they? Who knows? Out. And
But
Northern
can I
Ireland,
just say, you keep dividing up the United Kingdom into its constituent parts.
Well, I'm not keeping doing it. I'm
no,
just
but
saying,
you have done in the past, and that's actually not relevant.
Okay.
It was a vote. It was a referendum for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Right. And so it's actually not really relevant.
Well, it's relevant in the sense that
it is relevant.
If you have a referendum say, oh, we can leave the European Union, then constituent parts of the Union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland can then think, aha, we can have a referendum because we can leave, and we
yes,
but they can have another one
in 2014.
My point is,
and they can have another one.
They said they would like to stay in the union,
but they may change their mind if the conditions on which they stayed.
And the latest polling suggests they'd rather keep staying as well.
It's a good point, but Guy, the only reason I raise it is because when there was one parliament, no need to raise that. But now that you've given everyone their own parliament, certainly it becomes a question.
Another gift of Tony Blair.
Well,
but it's been divided by the
But you raise an interesting point because the devolution
that.
imposed by Tony Blair.
My own view would be I prefer the single
was an imperfect system because it took no account of England. Of course.
Sorry, we're talking over each other. Go ahead.
Yes, no. The point you raise about Tony Blair and the devolution. Yes, but the devolution settlement, if you can call it a settlement he imposed on the United Kingdom, was defective because it didn't take into account England. And there's no separate representation for England. And it was a rushed job. And if we look at this whole crisis in many ways...
I don't agree with it at all. I think it was a huge mistake.
Yes, I think it was a huge mistake. But and part of our current problem, looking at it from the United Kingdom point of view, is that both Blair and Cameron were very careless with the Constitution. And this is because they were instant prime ministers who'd never done anything apart from being an MP and then suddenly being prime minister, then leaving. They'd not, like previous generations, served their time. They hadn't really learnt what they were doing properly. They were young
really
men,
come up through the ranks.
Yeah, exactly. So they hadn't really appreciated it. And we now are facing two particular problems. One is the defective settlement of Tony Blair, including the establishment of the Supreme Court. Second is the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which has sort of robbed the Prime Minister of the day of his discretion or her discretion to go to the Queen and say we'd like to dissolve Parliament to have an election to sort of clear whatever logjams there might be. And this is this has brought us to this situation of actual stalemate, where it seems impossible to do anything.
I think, I think we're missing. We can get caught up in these endless details. They're fascinating. It's a really,
but
people
if you want to
study and write books on each of these areas.
Just to go back to your original point, what is the cause of Euro-Skepticism?
Correct.
Across Europe.
Thank you very much.
And it is the following. It is essentially a reaction by people who feel that the modern world, and in particular globalization, is affecting them personally and their families badly. They're unsure, they're frightened, and they see the politicians in all the countries sort of running around telling them it's a great idea without actually...
Politicians holding hands with corporations and saying, we know what's good for you, of which the EU is seen by a lot of people as the prime example of that union of interest against individual
and so whenever people
Mr. Jefferson is on a spit like this.
Yes. So whenever people get a chance to vote against the politicians of the day, they will vote against. Now, and that's what we saw in 2016 in the referendum. A lot of people use that as a proxy for all sorts of things. There were many people who had a principled objection to the European Union going back to the very beginning because of its incompatibility,
it's not a uniform
or its perceived
acceptance.
incompatibility with the British system, where you elect one person in one constituency, and the government, as represented by ministers of the Crown, stands up every week in the House of Commons, and to defend a policy, and if the policy is not right, then there is a way of changing the policy. That's what is lacking in the European Union.
Yes, and you said something very interesting about the origins of the European Economic Community, which was 58 or something. It was de Gaulle. And originally there was Euro-Skepticism within the people who were forming this, particularly about the UK. Because as I remember, de Gaulle didn't want the UK in.
He blocked the...
Isn't that correct?
He blocked the UK's entry because he perceived that the UK would be running it to the detriment of France.
Right.
So he blocked it.
Within its own founding fathers, if you will.
Churchill was actually one of the founding fathers of the European Union and the European Economic Community after the war.
And we said, for the good reason of
the United Kingdom was very supportive of this.
Yes, because they wanted to prevent further wars by uniting everybody in a business sense. If you're trading across borders, most wars, a lot of wars, They're fought for property, of course. Every war is about property in some sense, despite the bugle calls of other,
Churchill will be
idealism.
spinning in his grave to see what's going on right now.
Yeah,
The
him
lack of
and Mr. Jefferson.
There'll be a lot of
George
great
Washington.
spinning going on, I think, yes.
We're not allowed to mention those guys.
I think
what's wrong?
I'm joking.
no, I understand. I think
come on,
the
your
fear
show.
is that the guy points
The
out the
social
lack
justice warriors won't like us mentioning these brilliant people.
But they don't watch
we have
this
to talk
show.
about AOC.
This
as
is
some
above their heads.
equivalent.
They don't understand. Because we're not
non-entity.
knitting.
Yes.
Or
I think what
covered
Guy,
in rainbows.
what Guy points
go
out,
ahead.
that there's lack of democratic accountability, is clearly shown at any European Council meeting where the heads of state, which are elected directly by individual constituents of each individual country,
Right.
horse trade between each counterparty on a big round table, sometimes to the wee hours of the morning, and the national interests of each party obviously, negotiate behind closed doors to get better positions within, let's say, the Commission or different portfolios, or negotiate better budgets, etc. We saw this to the benefit of Poland, that obtained an enormous budget in the 2013 to 2020 European Union budget in terms of structural funds to basically rebuild Polish infrastructure.
Philip, let
and
me
this
ask
was
you a question.
horse trading
How,
done by elected heads of state who were joined by their unelected civil servants, very often appointed, to negotiate on behalf of the nation within a trading bloc of which there are members. And I don't quite necessarily understand where the view of let's say, having this unelected body, because this is a myth. As we mentioned from the outset, the Commission
They're
and all the
representatives
constituent
of
parts,
elected representatives.
exactly,
That's
who
your
work
point.
for,
Which
let's
would
say,
be
the
similar as the
Commission,
Prime Minister is elected by
all the
referendum.
civil servants
Yeah, I
working
think-
for the Foreign Ministry. It's
Can I help you
40,000
make your
individuals.
point? Can I help you?
Absolutely.
The Prime Minister is elected by members. He's not directly elected by people. That supports your
but I think
argument.
the point
Philip,
is one
I
of
think, in a
perception.
Actually,
very
no, the Prime Minister is
coherent
directly
way.
elected. He has to win a seat in Parliament.
Well,
No, but I don't mean that. I mean, but he's not elected Prime Minister from that seat. He's elected by other
he's
MPs.
the leader of his
Boris
He's elected by
Johnson
MPs.
was
It's a
elected
similar
by
idea.
Each party has
100,000.
It's a similar idea. It's not direct.
Boris Johnson was elected Prime Minister
similar
by
idea.
the membership of the Conservative Party, which is actually at a record low, and I think it's under 200,000 individuals.
Been growing very strongly, actually.
Well, I wasn't thinking
But I
so
wanna
much
come back
about
to the
the
point and
size
ask
of the
Philip-
actual members of parties, but the votes they're getting, which gives them seats, which gives them the right to choose the Prime Minister. The United States or France, you have an election for president. In Poland, you have an election for president, which is totally independent of the leader. You have prime ministers too, but in France and Poland, of course, people know that. Americans watching may
but
not
in the
know
United
that.
States and
True.
France, the head of state is also the head of government, which is not the case in the United Kingdom.
Right.
Sorry, I just
yes.
want to come back to a point, because Philip's idea that the
go
European
ahead.
Union is some wonderful democratic utopia is complete.
He's not saying that,
complete
are you?
bunkum.
No, I didn't say that. I'm just pointing out that
You are
the
trying to say
argument.
that.
No, I'm
That's
arguing.
what you're saying. So I just have a question for you.
it's
How
countering-
democratic was it?
He's saying
when
that they know what's better for you.
The French were
because
given
It's
a
different
referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and they
Yeah.
said no. They rejected it.
Yeah.
The Irish were given a referendum
Yeah.
on the Lisbon Treaty, and they said no. And were made
What's
to
the
vote.
Lisbon Treaty? Quick shorthand for people.
Lisbon Treaty was the next stage of creating a federal United States
It
of
was
Europe,
going to actually produce
where everyone was going to be forced probably by the end of next year or in the next couple of years into the single currency, whether they wanted to or not.
That's not true.
And
That's
so on
another
and so
myth.
It was an attempt to create effectively a European Union constitution.
Right.
And of course, they had the referenda in Ireland and France, and I think the Netherlands also voted against.
And your point is, I just
The
wanted
point
to define
is
that
the
for people.
And it
French
was
said
defeated.
no and were ignored. They tweaked a few things and called it
It
something else.
wasn't really tweaking a
And
few
the Irish
things.
were made to vote again.
Ireland has
This is
a-
the sort of modus operandi of the European Union.
Well, that's a
You're
bit of
saying
a
it's
myth.
exactly
It's
what
not
they're conspiring.
democratic.
No,
so,
well,
so
no.
right now you've got the Brussels centre with the Quislings in Britain conspiring to organise another referendum.
Quislings?
The Quislings.
Is that a
back
new
here-
party? Are they like the Quakers? Or?
No, the Quislings.
Are they
one who
like- do they make
conspires
their
with
own
the foreign
furniture?
enemy.
Quisling.
They make their own furniture.
Prime Minister of
Vocab, you
Norway
need to bring
was
your
a traitor.
dictionary to these
The
meetings.
Oh, as a traitor in Norway.
Yes, he was a
Who cares
traitor in
about?
Norway.
We're talking about Norway.
Well, Norway.
They're nice people. They make good
Yeah,
sweaters.
exactly. Yes.
I like them.
No,
Good oil.
But I mean, it is.
You ever tried their
It
oil?
is
It's good
largely
stuff.
a question of perception, in fact.
everything
and also,
is
let
a
me
question
just rebut.
of perception. But there's a practice to it as well.
Deep philosophy aside,
Deep
in the
philosophy
real
is
world,
being related to Mr. Hume.
in the real world, you've got the Brussels bureaucrats in their standard modus operandi right now.
I want to ask
trying to orchestrate another referendum in Britain.
They're not.
Where
They're
they'll leave a choice between
We're going
Remain
into a
or
cul-de-sac on this point.
No,
He thinks the Commission works because they are democratically elected through people who were voted for.
He can live in that
You
fantasy
disagree.
fairy tale.
You
No,
disagree.
I didn't mention that,
whether
actually.
you see the Commission as the equivalent of, sorry, because this is relevant,
Yes, sir.
the equivalent of
You're right.
a collection of the permanent secretaries of ministers in the
Exactly.
United
It's
Kingdom.
a civil service.
we don't elect the
Civil
cabinet
service.
secretary.
You don't.
And the problem is, and the real problem is
The
that
deep state.
Juncker
This is a very
and these
important
people,
point.
these Juncker, if the cabinet secretary in England went around lecturing the government on how to behave,
Right.
and having his own big car and all the paraphernalia,
Right.
then there will be a problem. But because Juncker behaves like that and doesn't behave like the cabinet secretary, we have this problem.
No,
The main problem,
one step further,
Juncker's
though.
main problem for the
Juncker
British is that he's
make
German.
laws.
Well,
No, he's not.
I don't know if you're a
He's
history
from
buff.
He's from
Luxembourg.
Luxembourg.
I don't know if you're a history buff,
He's
but
from
I
Luxembourg.
seem to
He was
remember
Prime Minister
2
of
wars
Luxembourg.
against the Germans.
Yes, he
He-
did.
They
He's from-
started both of them. They said, who are we going to fight?
he's
The
from
world.
Luxembourg.
Twice. They almost won.
Luxembourg. He
Sometimes.
was Prime Minister of Luxembourg for many
Yes.
a year. And
An enormous
actually,
economic power.
the Commission is the civil service that's appointed to oversee the common market, the European Union trading bloc. And in fact, they are appointed by the heads of state, and they go to meet the heads of state and report to them, and then they are told how to behave and what their mandate is. Let's say Barnier has been appointed by the European heads of state to negotiate with the British government regarding, let's say, Brexit. And he goes weekly to meet with all individual heads of state to report back to them. He is basically an employee of our elected officials. So this is a bit of a myth.
What do you think about Barnier's quote? That he wants to make the deal with Britain so diabolical
and absolutely,
that the Brits will want to remain. What do you think about that?
Well, that's. I would like to return back to one point about that you mentioned.
Give him an answer and then return.
Okay.
Don't ignore him.
I think it will be...
He hates ignorance. Don't ignore him.
No, because it's not going to be simple. Why on earth should the European Union give, as I think Donald Tusk, the President of the European Union, has said, the British government, it's to have its cake and eat it. There has to be a dislocation that's not going to be beneficial to the United Kingdom to then benefit from, for example, having all the benefits of, let's say, the single market and trading within the European Union without being a member. Even once Britain, let's say, after the current agreement, which hopefully will go through by the end of, let's say, this month or through the extension period by the end of this year, which will resolve the issue of, let's say, Northern Ireland and move the Brexit process to the next step, which means negotiating a free trade agreement by the end of 2020, which I frankly think is going to be next to impossible. The fact of the matter is that the British government, whatever red lines Boris Johnson mentioned as Foreign Secretary, is going to still have to pay into the European Union to benefit from the trade of the single market. Currently, the Norwegians, they don't necessarily pay into the budget. They finance grants, as do the Swiss. The Swiss, I think, to the equivalent of 1.9 billion euros per annum. The Icelandic EEA countries, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Norway, of which Norway accounts for 97%, pay the equivalent of I think for Norway, it's 800 million krona, which is circa 300 million pounds, 300 million euros a month, which actually, if you look at GNI indexes, because the whole budget is based on
relative to their
GNI,
population, that's
actually,
a lot.
Absolutely,
What your point
it's
is.
1 to 1.15% of GNI would be equivalent on, let's say, if we compare it to the British economy compared to Norway, which is a much smaller economy, approximately 5 to 6 billion euros is the Norwegian contribution to benefit from the single market. And the Norwegians basically don't have any benefit of CAP, which they don't need because they don't have a very big farming sector, except for agriculture.
They get free defense there.
But the issue that they have is they have no representation. So the Norwegians, with their agreement with the single market, are in an undemocratic scenario, which is unfortunate.
We're running out of time.
Philip, you're missing a fundamental point. You do not need an EU federalising political project in order to have free trade. Full stop. There is, in terms of Brexit and a future free trade agreement, We're starting from a level playing field of free trade. So why would you want to put up barriers? Why would the EU want to put up barriers when they're an enormous net exporter to Britain?
Well, not enormous. It's, I think...
Britain is the largest single export market.
Okay, we're running to time,
and
we're running to time.
And that's
I can see that we're going to have to do a second installment,
And
which
a
I'm very
third.
happy to
And a
invite
third
you.
and a fourth.
I'm
And a
happy to invite you to a second installment. This has been a very interesting conversation, at least for me. I want to ask you about several concrete, this has been very interesting policy stuff and philosophical stuff, but several concrete areas. And I see that we're not going to get to Central Europe, but we can do that next time. And I hope you'll come back for that. So I think it's be well worth it. This has been interesting. Let me ask you about several different categories. Is Britain better in or out in these categories? Okay, and I want short answers from each of you. Okay, just a short answer. A paragraph, no filibustering from any of you. Okay, defense. Britain better in the EU or outside?
Doesn't really matter. It's part of NATO.
Okay.
And European Union
NATO. I
has
mean,
no real defense capabilities.
Okay, that's one down. One in favor of Britain going out.
You've seen what my answer was.
Yeah. Trade and tariffs. Trade and tariffs.
Better
because
in.
this is...
Better in because I started from Guy's position of being
Better
very
in.
skeptic.
Better in.
But better in, because if you look throughout the world, I mean, argue about World Trade Organization, we blew in the face.
Let's not. Let's just stick to this.
If you look around the world, every country essentially has some arrangement with its neighbours on trade, and it's just farcical to assume we can get a better trade deal by not being in something.
Okay, Philip.
Do you know the last time Britain negotiated a free trade agreement?
Tell me.
When they entered the European Union,
Okay.
the European Economic Area, so 1972.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a wake-up call once they leave the European Union and try to negotiate free trade agreements with India, China, and all sorts of other global trading
Let's
blocs.
move on. Very good point. Both of you, very good points. Guy.
Out. Britain, as I've explained, is right now in this protectionist racket called the customs union, so can't lower tariffs for food from outside, for coffee, for clothes and footwear, which lower that.
I'm surprised you haven't mentioned fishing.
Consumers hugely benefit.
Fishing would have been my number one thing.
And
if I were you.
Well, that's about taking control of Britain's coastal waters, which right now are being completely pillaged.
It's the thing that makes Britain different, is being surrounded by water and being a maritime.
I also think on fishing, it is actually,
power.
sorry, just very quickly, on fishing it is important to point out that in the original negotiations with Ted Heath, when we joined the European, what was then the European Economic Community, fishing had been out of the deal completely.
It was not included.
And it was included on the morning they were due to sign. The EU introduced that, or the EEC. It was
under Heath?
Yes.
Which is 72, 71?
72. Heath essentially was ambushed on that point.
May I ask these gentlemen,
Please.
what is the percentage of GDP that fishing is brought into the UK economy?
It's less than 1%, I think.
And so why are, let's say, I know it's a very emotive issue for coastal communities, but we're fighting the whole decision of Brexit about 1% of GDP when you're destroying the financial service sector, which accounts for 2/3 of the economy.
We're just answering his question on fishing. We're not making a point about fishing.
I think
it's our American cousin. He made the point on fishing.
It's rather amusing.
If you go down to one of these devastated fishing communities and make that point, Phil,
it's been constantly raised. And it's important to talk about that because it's raised all the time. And we see it's only 1%. And I'm glad
I need to make another point though about trade.
That. That was good.
Another quick point though about trade, because Philip keeps banging on about the need for organisation on product standards without mentioning the point that, of course, the market decides. No one decided that we were going to adopt DVDs before Netflix came in as the standard for discs.
Do you think he's banging
for
on?
laser
I thought he
discs.
was being very
The market
civilized.
worked it out. The market worked it out.
Banging on.
And this point needs to be made.
The difficulty is, of course, we don't have free
have
markets anyway. And the idea that we're trading with the United States will be a free market, we're the world's leading mercantilist country.
Next.
We've got
to move on.
Here's an interesting point.
We're running out of time.
Very interesting point on fishing, because let's say the Norwegians, who are massive exporters of fish, they don't actually have massive production facilities in Norway. The fish that they trade are actually bulk fishing to, let's say, countries like Poland. So companies like Growlin, etc., benefit highly from actually the production of cutting up, slicing the fish, packaging it for sale in the European Union. You'll discover that a lot of the UK fishing industry will have disastrous consequences from leaving the trading bloc, because they're going to have to move their operations to the continent and have a bridge to bring in the additional benefits of UK
actually not. If
fishing.
If this agreement goes through, Northern Ireland is effectively a 5,400 square mile free port. It has a foot in both.
But Guy, you make a good point. But if Northern Ireland has a foot in both, then the UK could equally have a foot in both.
Right.
As a whole.
No, because Northern Ireland is part of the UK, so can't independently negotiate free trade direct deals.
GDP. Better in or out? GDP. Will it be a better gross national product, GNP, sorry, gross national product inside or out?
I reluctantly come to the conclusion in, actually. Because we've already seen, because the economy didn't go pop, everybody assumes it's fantastic. What we're actually seeing is like a very slow puncture in a car tyre. When we wake up and find the bump in the road, it'll be too late, I think.
Philip?
I would have to agree completely with Nicholas. We noticed that since the Brexit referendum, the UK has dropped down from being the 4th largest economy in the world to now currently the 6th.
Okay.
I think EU, no EU, economies move in cycles, and so every time the cycle goes down, all the Remainers scream, this is a result of the vote to leave, and every time the economy picks up, all the Brexiteers say, look, see what happens when you can start to think about your own direction. So it's a bit of a silly argument. However, in the long term, the direction of the Federalist EU is to harmonise taxation, and the general bulk of the EU governments at the moment have a socialist wealth-destroying policy of ever-increasing tax and spend, which we can debate this till the cows come home, but this absolutely impoverishes everybody. And Britain has an opportunity now to seize its own free trade policy around the world and lower taxes for the benefit and growth of the economy.
Which leads me to, thank you,
that will materialise, though, over decades.
Here's the last one, the only one we have time for now, because we're going to have to wrap up. Liberty. Is Britain freer or not inside the EU or outside inside the EU? Freer or not?
Well, I would actually say...
difficult question.
It's a difficult question, but actually we will be no less free outside. Sorry, we'll be no more free outside, because we will then be facing the rest of the world as 60 to 70 million people alone against the rest of the world, which was fine in the 19th century. We didn't care.
No. You still got the Canadians, you still got the Australians, the Americans. You have the whole Anglo-Saxon bloc.
The United States has a trade deal with its closest two neighbours. Exactly.
At least for another 4
so
years.
I don't see, because we've already seen with the leading Brexiteers talking about regaining control, and that, in fact, the contempt they show to Parliament and parliamentary procedures. So I'm not actually convinced these are the people I would necessarily...
Oh, come on, Nick. Are you seriously suggesting that's a reasonable point?
Yeah,
to say that Parliament is behaving entirely properly? Well,
Parliament is trying to grapple with the issue which David Starkey, a man of great knowledge...
I'm familiar with Richard Starkey.
...has actually identified as being the first time in modern history
is he any relation?
where we have a conflict between parliamentary sovereignty and popular sovereignty. And this is something new in 300 years of history.
I don't know about David Starkey, but Richard Starkey says that he's for Brexit.
So is David Starkey.
I know him as Ringo Starr.
He's a very interesting historian.
Yes, very
That's how I know.
But he's very interesting. We should try and get David Starkey on the programme.
We should try and get Ringo Starr on the phone.
Yeah, and David Starkey. Hello. The Starkeys. It's like an Alan Partridge. Who's your favourite Starkey?
I can't do a Liverpool accent. Can you do a Liverpool? You can do it.
No.
No, I can't do it. This is from watching old Beatles movies. To watch Hard Day's Night. You could probably do it.
It's the wind of the Mersey Tunnel that goes basically to create the Liverpool accent.
Is that what does it?
Exactly, quite specific.
This has been lively. This has been fun. I wanted to ask you, we have a little bit of time. Last thing.
Manifestly freer.
Manifestly freer. Because you're electing people straight and you can have your own
And yes,
arguments.
Britain may only have a population now of about 63 million, I think it is.
It'll be 70 in 3
years'
time.
I'm from Virginia, and we don't like... You know, the federal government telling us, the old-time Virginians they don't like the federal government telling what to do. We don't even like the fact that all the people have moved in around Washington and now they're taking over the state.
I don't believe that by being in the European Union we're less free. Let's put it that way.
What's that?
I don't believe that simply by being a virtue of the member of the European Union we're somehow less free than we were before. You know, if you look at it from a continental European perspective, if you speak to people who actually are heavily involved in what goes on in the European Commission, their view is that for a long time the British and the Germans have been running everything together, and everybody else has not really had much of a look.
Okay, you have thank you very much. We have 1 minute left. Currency, in or out? Yes or no? Currency.
Out.
Currency.
There's no change.
No change.
Would it be better out or in?
Well, there's no change.
The currency.
Well, again, another huge subject, but in a nutshell, you cannot have a single currency which demands a single monetary policy to
Because this
work
involves
without,
Poland
without
as well,
a single
the
fiscal policy.
similar approach.
Exactly.
Which
Guy's
is the
absolutely
problem.
right on that point.
Okay, I want to thank you. Guy, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Lively
Will.
as usual. Philip, thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
My pleasure.
It's been great to have you in. Nikki,
Willie!
give me that. Fist bump, baby. Yeah, that's the way we roll, with the fist bumps with the guys from Oxford. Okay, thank you very much for watching There's a Will, with my guests, Guy Pinsent, Philip Evison, and the inimitable and always sharply dressed Nicholas Richardson, no relation, of course.
Thank God for
I'm
that.
Will Richardson, and I want to thank you for watching. We'll be back.